families in Revit. And families are the way that Revit organizes most of the stuff in your project, or pretty much all of them. And I've opened up the sample project that comes with Revit just to discuss a couple of things. And this is actually a handy model if you're ever looking to learn about Revit. It's got kind of little information boxes you can go, and they have web-based tutorials. But anyway, basically, what are families? Well, families, it's kind of a collection. They can be geometry, like in a piece of furniture. They can have lines, like you see here in these column lines, and door tags. They can have text. And they can have parameters. Okay, and parameters are kind of like bits of information. That information can show up as text. It can show up as dimensional information, or it can show up as things like materials or lighting properties. Okay, and there are within a Revit model, there are families which are kind of for repeated elements, things like furniture. Okay. And for these, the properties are generally set. I'll just take a look at the properties here real quick. They're generally set in the model. So if you want to change it, you have to edit the type. So these are called type properties. Okay. Other things like the walls, it's actually the family that determines the material, different elements of it. So you'll have to, there are some type properties, of course, but then how walls behave in your project, for example, they can receive wall sconces and some certain types of furniture, that's determined by the family. Finally, you do have families where every instance is pretty unique, and that is something like a stairway, which we have over here. Every stair is going to be a little different because of the way you sketch it. So when you get the properties, you'll see families available and family members. Okay, so there's different family members. In fact, you can add new family members or delete them as you see fit. But then each instance is totally unique. Same with these column grid lines. Each instance of the grid line may have certain parameters. For example, this can be bent to be offset so that you can read it a little better, and it can have a different letter. We can just type in a different letter, and it's still part of the grid bubble family. Okay, you just click on another one, you'll see there's the same family. If you were to change the parameters of that family, for example, the font or the size of the circle, all instances of that family member would change. But the actual kind of type or instance properties here, I've changed this from C to W, that would not change. Okay, so some things are controlled family-wide, and some things are controlled individually. And there you go, that's families. Now, for us, we've already learned how to do simple families that are modeled in place. And just to go over, why would you do that? Why would you do that? I'm going to open up a model with a stair in it. Example of a model in place kind of component. And to get the wall under this stair, as many of you found when you had curved stairs, you can't really create openings in curved walls. You can create openings, you can't create a custom profile. So we can do this with a mass. And we could absolutely use the massing create a mass in place. But what I like to do, I like to make sure that the component that we place, the mass that we place, has the appropriate identity within the model. It uses a family type, in this case walls, that will allow it to show up on schedules and that sort of thing. I'll just call this wall under stair. And what you can do is now use your massing tools that we learned earlier to create a mass that will fit under the stair. Now, basically, I think a swept blend would be the way to go with this. And that's because one end of this is going to be different than the other. It's going to have a different profile, but it's basically a curve. Okay, so first of all, I'll draw the path. Okay, if you remember from a swept blend, there's a path. And I'm going to use the pick option just to grab that curve. Okay, check mark checkbox. And now when we go back into 3D here, you'll see the path is on the ground, okay? And what we can do is edit the profiles. If you go to the profile, select profile 1, or you can actually just double click on, see how it gives you these reference planes here? You can just double click on it to draw on it. This front one, we really just want to be basically a rectangle. Okay, and you'll see Revit is more than happy to draw you a simple rectangle. All right, and the big thing is, you know, considering how do you want the mass to sit under the stringers of the stair. And once you're done with that profile, you can double click on the other profile and draw the opposing side, and Revit will kind of make up the difference, okay? And again, it does help to be in 3D view so you can kind of remember where you are in space. I'm on the outside, so when I draw my rectangle, I have to kind of go up here to the inside. All right, finish that, and finish that, and like magic, it creates a lovely wall under my stairs. Okay, it does not, you know, allow you to add like a wall base, that kind of thing. It's not that kind of wall. So there are some disadvantages to doing it this way, but this is a great example of something that modeling in place is going to make life a lot easier. Now, an example of something you'd want to create as a separate family is something I'd all like you to have in your projects, a custom front desk or reception desk. And it can be, you know, funky and cool based on your artist. And the way that you do this, and I just kind of Googled some images of cool front desks just to give me an idea. And especially when you're trying to create something either from your own sketch or from an idea, and it's perfectly fine to go and look for inspiration, you'll want to think about what objects, what masses would make up that desk, and kind of deconstruct it. And I want you to all do this for your project. And again, you can do it by hand, you can do it on the computer, but the big thing is take your image or sketch and look at the bits and pieces and determine what they're made out of, or how you could make them in Revit. In this case, this is pretty blocky, so I can have a big block for the base and a big block that's supposed to point at the top. There may be an opening where the receptionist sits, so his or her legs don't smash into the block. So we can use what's called a void form to take bites out of these blocks. But that's the basic idea. If we look at some other desks, here is a reception desk with kind of a profile to it. Well, that profile is what we would draw, and then we would create a sweep along the plan of this desk. So we could draw a straight line and basically two arcs and sweep this profile along that. This one, you know, you might say, oh, how am I going to model that? It's probably almost certainly just a series of extrusions, okay? Each one kind of skinny, and each one with a slightly different shape. And in fact, you can copy each one and make one smaller or bigger. And that would actually make it pretty easy once you have that one extrusion. This one is probably a swept blend. That would be the best way to create it. Because basically, it's got a similar profile from one side to the other. It's just that it gets taller from one end to the other. So you can see that diagramming really helps when you go to draw your front desk. Now, what we're going to do next is create a family, but we're going to create it all on its own. We're going to go to File, New, Family, okay. And same as when we did a mass in place, it's going to say, what kind of family would you like to be from? And in this case, let's just go with furniture, okay. You can see that there are many different kinds, just like before. And what will happen is when you go to your family editor, you will see that you have those same kind of two reference planes that we saw when we drew the sweep, you know, blended, swept blend. And it works the same way, okay, except now we don't have the rest of the model around us as a distraction. And so here, you know, again, some people prefer to just do everything model in place. Some people don't do anything model in place. My distinction is when I know something that I want to draw, and I know the dimensions or I know the shape, like this front desk that we're doing, I'll pretty much draw it in its own family. Just, I don't know, I find it's less distracting. Okay. So first of all, in your family, there are the usual views, many of the usual views, not all of them, including the main floor plan, which is called the reference level, and that's the level that we're drawing on right now. So if I wanted to create the base of that desk, I just go to Create, Extrusion, okay? And obviously if I knew a dimension, I would do that. I think this desk was, I don't know, what do you think, about 8 feet long, and probably, oh, I don't know, what do you think, about 2 feet deep? Sure, why not? Let's go with 2 feet deep, all right? And some people are more obsessive about keeping the objects more or less at the center of the crosshairs here of the two reference planes. That's fine. Nudge and other things work, okay? Remember, when you create an extrusion, it has an extrusion end. That's sort of how much it's going to extrude out of the screen at our faces. And in this case, if I remember correctly, here, let's take a look at the image one more time. It probably is going up to standard height for a countertop, which is about 30 inches. Okay. And we'll make this 30 inches. Okay. And apply. And we'll finish our mass. And then we also want to, while I'm here, I'm thinking that maybe we should create the space for the person to put their feet. Okay, remember we talked. I talked about there was a space to for the person sitting at the desk to put their feet. We can do that by drawing what's called a void. Okay, and you often will want to avoid this topic. Never mind. Okay, but basically it's the same as solid forms. These 5 shape types that we see here, there are void forms in exactly the same 5 shapes. Okay. And all you have to do, in this case, I'm going to show you something a little different. I'm going to set the work plane to be the back of the desk here. I'll just pick a plane. And again, we did this when we were massing in place. And I'll use this back face of the desk as the plane. And now you can just, I'll just create, instead of a regular extrusion, I will create a void form, void extrusion. And let's give her a little bit of a countertop here, or him or her, whoever's working at the front desk. Whoops. Let's draw a rectangle. There we go. And we'll just give it an opening, like so. And if you were modeling drawers or other things, this would be exactly the same process. We also don't want it to be quite so thick. 2 foot 2 is probably fine. And apply, and OK. And when you create OK, you see how as I mouse over this object, that shows me the shape. And in fact, I can even select it and use these grips to drag the void in any direction that I want. So if I want a different look to it, I can do that. And then Revit knows when I uncheck it to create that opening. Now, I guess I did that a little too far. One of the annoying things with Revit is it can be hard to pick these void forms. You do sometimes have to mouse over where you know it is and hit Tab to find that void form. There we go. We've got the void form. And what I must have done, oh yeah, see how I've stretched it through the front. I can use this adjuster here to drag it so that it's not going through the form. Okay, and often you will want to change your view properties if you're having trouble, you know, as you get and you start adding drawers and other things. It can get quite confusing. Okay, you can also copy and paste void forms. But there we go. There's my basic shape. Okay, and if I wanted to create, oh, I don't know, some drawers, I absolutely could control, click, and drag this form, and with the second one, create another opening. Okay. Oh, except that looks a little funny. I don't know what happened there. All right, I must have dragged it down a little bit. Let's leave out the drawers for now. So there you go. There's the base. Now the last piece is that shape that kind of fits in the front here. And there are any number of ways that we can draw that that kind of stone panel that fits up here. But I find that's one that probably is best drawn as a an extrusion. So we'll go to Create, Extrusion. But I want to draw it basically from the side, okay? And let me just go, and I'll stay in this 3D view because it's a little easier. And what I want to do is set the work plane. Again, pick up work plane, and it might be actually easier to be in there. Little 3D. There we go. Now I can see. Sometimes, again, it is hard to see what you're doing, but there we go. Okay, I think we got the right one. And you can come in and draw the shape just by creating an extrusion. And now it should all seem like old hack to you. Okay, you know, you're obviously going to have to make some guesses about the dimension of things because we can't see behind this fixture in the photo. We only have one photo. But typically these front desks, they have kind of a counter where you leave handouts and that sort of thing. And by the way, you can select multiple elements and nudge them. If you try to nudge them sideways, Revit doesn't like that, okay? So no matter what you do, you can nudge the piece, but it likes to keep things in plane, all right? Now, as far as the extrusion end, I think what we're going to do, I'm going to just finish this extrusion. We're going to change the extrusion face here in 3D view, okay? Because it's just too hard to get it right the way you want it. And I'll just, again, try and find the grip, the grabber, that is going to get you the shape that you think is what the picture looks like. Now, in this case, I think it was a little bigger, okay? And of course, this is all about proportions. This is design, so you'll want to study it in a manner that is going to help you out if you need to go into 3D or whatever. Now, the last piece I want to do here is I feel like this thing has just a little bit of a base. It comes up off the ground just a smidge. And the way we can do that, we can select the main mass and just move it up a tiny, tiny bit, okay? You just have to be careful as you move stuff that they don't go too much. There we go. That's actually even probably too much. I'll go zoom in a little and bring it back down. Because there was a little bit of a reveal sitting on the floor there, okay? And I could come and draw in a little bit of a kick space, but I believe it was meant to look like it was floating. All right, so there you go, a lovely front desk. All right, let's take a look at what this looks like in a project. And first of all, you do want to save it. Control S to save or whatever. You can click the save button up here. And I'm going to put it on my desktop so I remember where it is. And I will call it front desk. Now, I would strongly recommend that you guys find a folder that you store it in, that's your project folder. That has all your custom elements for your project in it. What you will find in offices is they often have a folder for custom families that are shared across the entire network of the office. So anyway, I'm just going to put it on the family, on the front desk, on the desktop, so that I remember where it is, because otherwise I have to hunt for it. And then you load it into the project. And it will, by the way, warn you if you haven't saved it. Also, you have to have a project open. So right now, I have the project open that I was working on. Oh, and see, it even says, do you want to save it? And I'll put this guy on the desktop too. I'll just call it, furniture test or something like that. I can spell furniture test. There we go. And it puts it in the project. And oh, what a wonderful thing it is that we have created here. Okay, so that's the basics of creating a family kind of on its own. Now, let's talk a little bit about some further things that we can do to refine our family. I'm going to go back to my front desk here. And what you can do is start to assign parameters, okay? And the reason you would do that is to make life easier. So for example, let's say I want to assign materials to these guys. if I don't use a parameter, I'd have to open up the family every single time and edit it and then apply a material. So I'm going to select the front face here, and if you look at the properties, you'll see that there's a spot you can add a material, okay? And by default, it's just by category. In this case, it's a mass, so it will apply some material. If you click in the cell here in properties that is for materials, you'll see the three little dots, sort of like the three little pigs, but the three little dots. That always indicates that there's a menu to be had underneath. I'll just click on that menu, and it will bring up the materials menu. And right now, we're not going to talk too much about materials other than to say that there are materials, and I'll just stretch this out. This is the materials browser, and basically the way it works, first of all, there's a couple tabs. The identity tab, which has things like the name, okay, and so if I wanted to create a new material for my front desk, I can come down here, and there's a button for it down here. There's a couple main buttons here. One creates and duplicates material, so you can choose here when you click on it whether or not you want to duplicate a selected material or just create a new one, because there's only a few materials in this family. So I'm going to create a new material, and when I come here, the identity tab allows me to say, and I usually append these with my initials, AB. Just partly because my name begins with A, and that puts it at the top of the list. Okay, what you'll see, some people will use underscore. I'll show you what that looks like. They'll type underscore. That top makes it go to the top of the list when you're hunting for a material. But whatever, I'll just use AB, front desk, stone. Okay. And you can even tell it, by the way, which class it's in. There are a lot of different sort of classifications for materials, so I'll choose stone. Okay. You could even, if you were feeling really detailed, you could get manufacturer information and cost and all that kind of stuff. For the graphics, this is what it looks like when you haven't rendered it. What I like to do is just use the render appearance. Some people will make these a color, just so that has nothing to do with the render appearance. I like to use the render appearance just... I like to set it all up at the beginning. And the render appearance, again, we're not going to talk too much about rendering, is what it will look like when it renders. That's why it's called appearance. And by default, there's kind of a basic set of parameters about the material here. I'll just stretch this out a little bit so you can see it better. And basically here you can choose, like let's say I wanted it to just be, I don't know, red. Okay, see how it updates the color. This is kind of a rendering preview here in this window. Some of your computers will be faster than others. Okay, I'm working on a fairly slow computer, so you can see when I change the size of the window, it takes a little bit of time. I can set the render settings to a little higher quality, but it will slow my machine down enough. You can also, by the way, select an image, okay, and you can browse for an image. I'm not going to dig too deep into any of that, but there's a number of things you can do: reflectivity, transparency, all this kind of stuff. So if I had an image of stone that I wanted to use, I could absolutely just use that image, okay? For now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to open what's called the asset library, okay? And, or actually, yeah, let's open the asset library here. And, sorry, there's a little button up here that replaces what's called the asset, which is, Revit has basically libraries of materials that it uses, and those are called assets, and we can choose a new one. Anyway, when I click replace that asset, what I can do is I can browse, and in some of Revit's automatically downloaded libraries, here I'll just drag this little fella over. And what you want to always do is use the appearance library. There's a couple of different libraries, you know, some based in different countries and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, we're going to use stone, and let's see if we can find a marble one. I'm just going to use that because it's easy, okay? And what you can see here is, you know, a nice polished alabaster. That'll do for now. And again, I just want to see if it works. To use it, you just double click on it, and I'm going to close the asset browser. You should see the image here take shape pretty quickly. Again, you know, your computer will take more or less time. You will also see if there's any tiling going on, and by that I mean how frequently the image repeats. If you want to find out how sort of big the image is, how big Revit thinks the image is, all you have to do is double click on the image here. And again, it's giving me kind of a small preview for it. But there's your image size. See how it says 4 feet by 4 feet? Okay, these are all things that you can change. Of course, everything is parametric in good old Revit. So, for example, the sample size here, if you have an image that you've sort of culled off of the internet, you can kind of define how big it is. I can make this 8 feet, whoops, not 8 inches, 8 feet, and it will make it square if I have it locked. And you see how it gets bigger or smaller. You can also sort of modify the position of this thing. I won't mess around with that right away, but what that will do is move it up or down on your screen. So anyway, and then there's other things. How bright is it? Which as you drag it, you may not see the results right away. But anyway, that's your basic material. Okay, and maybe I'll make a new material. And what I'm going to do, I'll take this one and I'll duplicate it. Or no, we'll just make a new material. It's often easier to just start with a new material. We'll go through the same process and we'll call it AB, front desk, white. Okay. And graphics, we'll tell it to use the render appearance. And then under appearance, in this case, I'm just going to go and change the color to something that's white. Okay. And what you can do, there's a number of things. You can control how glossy it is. Okay. I can drag that and make it more glossy. In fact, you can even add a number of other features, including reflectivity, which sometimes is nice. You have to check the box to turn it on. You see how that's maybe a little too reflective, but if we drag these down, you might start to get, you know, just a little bit of a hue there. Okay. Other things that we could add, but we won't, are transparency. We don't want it to be transparent. And we also don't want it to glow. That's self-illumination. We don't want it to have a bump. But maybe a tint, if we add a tint color to it. This is a way to kind of start with a base color and kind of draw it down to ever so slight of a tint here. There we go. Apply. And yeah, I think basically I just don't want it to be completely white. Even whites are not completely white. There's usually something on the blue or the red range. Okay. So there we go. We've created these two materials. Hopefully I didn't just hit cancel. I always do that. You can select the object and you can tell it to have a material that you've created in your project. In this case, stone. Okay. And when we select the other object, we can tell it to have the material that we want here. Okay, front desk white. There we go. Okay. So now we will save the document. I'll just do Control S and load it into the project. And what it will tell you when you go to the project, it'll say, do you want me to overwrite the existing version, or do you want me to overwrite the existing version and its parameter values? And I'll show you what that means in a second. So right now I'll bring it in. I'll just overwrite the existing parameters. Let's make this a realistic view. Okay. So I came in, come over here, and I chose realistic just so I could kind of see my materials in action here. You can also see that I don't have materials on most other objects in my particular view. And you can see that it did take the materials that I assigned. Now, I don't particularly like this marble image, okay, because it has a repeat pattern to it, and I don't want the repeat pattern. But I think what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to go back to my family. And what I want to do is change that repeat pattern but I'd like to change the materials here in this project rather than change them in the family, because it's kind of a pain to go back and forth. And what you'll see when I click on the front desk and I choose Edit Type, it does not give me the option to change the material. Now, wouldn't that be nice if it did? Well, let me show you how to do that. And it's actually quite easy. Well, easy-ish. Go back to your front desk. And before, we just assigned a material directly to this family, okay, the mass within the family. And that's a very common way that you'll see materials applied. But a better way is to create a parameter for that material. The way you do that, you go over here to the Family Types menu, okay? It's right over here in the upper left. And, you can add any parameter that you want, really, in this menu. Down here on the lower left, it allows you to add a new parameter. You can also edit existing ones, but there aren't any in here. I'm going to click the New Parameter button, and you'll see a menu pop up. And I want to call this front, we'll call it base color, okay? And then where do you want to group it? Well, basically, the discipline, it's going to just stay where it is now. The type of parameter is going to be a material parameter. So Revit knows that there are certain appropriate parameters that you can assign, and it groups it automatically under materials and finish. Okay, I'll click OK, and in fact, while I'm here, I'm going to make another one, and I'll call it stone color. Okay. And same thing, make sure you put it in the material section. It will show up in the menu, and in fact it works if you put it in the wrong section. Anyway, I'll put it in the right section because I want to be organized. And anyway, now when I select the base here, okay, so first of all, before I selected a material by clicking these three dots, okay, and you could just go and pick the material, but that won't allow us to edit it. Now what I want to do, if you go to the far left of this cell, there's a box that does not have three dots in it. Okay, so as a reminder, I clicked in here, there were three dots. You can see that there's actually another box right next to it. And if you mouse over it, it says Associate Family Parameter. If I click on that, it brings up a menu where any parameters you've created that are appropriate, in this case, material, you can choose them. So I'll choose base color for the base. And for whatever piece of furniture you guys design, you, of course, are going to want to choose parameters for each of the pieces. So if you have metal legs on your project, you can select the mass, or masses that define the legs, and create parameters that allow you to change it in the model. I prefer to change the materials in the model rather than in the family. And one of the reasons is when I if I update a material, sometimes when I load it into the project, it doesn't change it. I'm not quite sure why that is. Anyway, because we have changed some parameters here, we want to make sure we overwrite the existing parameter values. Okay. Now you might say, hey, wait, where's my materials? Well, I've loaded this into the project. Where I have to now apply materials in the properties menu. Okay, so I select the wall, desk, choose Edit Type, and you get your menu that we have before. But now look what we have at the top. We have a base color and a stone color. Now the only trick is that you need to have created your materials in advance. In my case, I loaded these materials in. Which one am I doing here? I'm doing base color. Okay, so we'll choose base color, and okay. I created them in the family, but they actually loaded in, and so now they're part of my main project. And what you should see is that same material. The advantage is now as I look at this, I'm like, oh, I want to modify this material. I want to change the repeat pattern. I can go in this model, rather than going into the family, I could actually just close the family. And if I go to the Manage ribbon, way on the left here, there's a button for Materials. And this is the Materials library in my main model. Okay, so in your case, it would be your cafe model. And you can come in and edit the stone material. Okay, so it's been kind of made a part of my project. I'll just double click on the image. and let's make it, I'm going to unlock it, and I'm going to make the width a lot wider, 16 feet. And done. Oh, did I click done, or did I click? Yeah, I clicked cancel. 16 feet. There we go. Done. Apply. What you should see is the pattern start to stretch out. Okay. It doesn't look particularly good right now, but it does illustrate the point. All right. So that is creating families and editing them to have different parameters. Can do to kind of make our front desk a little more user-friendly is to add a parameter for one of the dimensions, okay? And that might allow us to make it shorter or longer, just kind of depending on what we see in our project. Again, when you're not modeling in place, sometimes it's nice to have these parameters to help you out. And let's see, we'll go back to our front desk, and let me call up my project browser and go to the reference level, okay? And what you can do, any object that can kind of be measured can have a parameter put on that measurement, okay? So first of all, to put in a dimension, you go to the annotate ribbon, okay, just like you do in a main floor plan, and you come and you put an aligned dimension, and it references the edges of masses, okay? And I'll put that dimension in there. Whoops, I must have clicked off of it. There we go, and it says it's 8'6", and you can lock that dimension so that it's kind of glued to the end here. Now, what you can do, we can come back and create a parameter, okay? And you see we already have 2 parameters in there. We can add a third one, and we can call it, width desk, okay? And in this case, it is a length parameter, so we'll leave it in there, all right? And click OK. And now, and I'll just hit apply and OK. What you can do is select the dimension string and apply what's called a label, okay? A label is basically, I don't know quite why they don't just call it a parameter, but they don't. They call it a label. And apply width of desk, okay? And you might say, well, nothing has changed. Well, of course nothing has changed. But what you'll see, like for example, if I apply another one, let me hit save here, and I'll load it into the project. Okay. Now in this case, I have already changed the parameters of this component, right? I've added materials to the parameters, the instance parameters in the project. So I don't want to change those. I don't want to overwrite the existing parameter values. I just want to overwrite the existing version. And actually, I can show you the difference. If I overwrite the existing version, if I load in the component into the project and I overwrite the existing parameter values, you should see that the materials that I applied to this instance disappear. So obviously, you want to make sure that you think that through. Anyway, and now when you have this object in your project, you should be able to come in, choose edit type, and change these values. I'll just make it 0. And in theory, when I hit apply, you should see the desk shorten up, okay, ever so slightly. All right, so there you go. And which direction it goes has to do with which reference plane was used to extrude it. If you remember, when I created it, I used this side, I believe, to extrude it. So that's the direction that it will shorten in. And that's basically how you can create some real basic families with basic parameters. See part 2 of this to talk about making a light fixture. Another thing that I'd like you to create in your projects is a custom light fixture. And these are really, it's a fun thing to do. Partly it gives me an excuse to talk about some Revit things, but also there's just so many fun options. There's geometric stuff, there's more organic stuff, and obviously they light up, which is fun. And you can really go to town and show off some modeling skills. So new Revit family. And again, this is a standalone family, but now we're going to use a lighting fixture family. And there are a couple of different ones. I'm going to, the one that is a lighting, just says lighting fixture, is for floor-based models of light fixtures. There's also a wall-based one. There's a little section of wall that comes with it. And then there is a ceiling-based one. So let's try a ceiling-based light fixture just for the heck of it. And I'll click open. And one of the things that is very complicated about lighting fixtures and about a lot of families is that they use a lot of reference planes. Okay, so right now our reference plane here is up at the ceiling level. Okay, and this is actually a little stretch of ceiling here. It says basic ceiling. Height is set to 8 feet. And everything in the light fixture refers to the ceiling. So this is the light source here. And you can see it's kind of locked. It's actually double locked. It's locked to 2 different reference planes. This one is the light source axis from left to right, although it looks top to bottom to me on my screen. And then front to back is the other axis. So these axes, these reference planes, have been named. All right, that's really important because as you go to create geometry in a light fixture, you're up in the ceiling. You want to use these reference planes to help you locate things in the correct position. Okay, so if I go to the reference plane, I'll show you what I mean here. And I try to create, I'll just create a simple extrusion here. Go to create, extrusion, and maybe I'll make a kind of rod to hang my fixture from. Oh, that's a pretty big rod, though. Let me just zoom in and nudge this guy down a little bit. Make it a little smaller. Okay. Whoops. Lovely. Okay. And you'll want to make sure that this thing is kind of in the middle of these reference planes. Okay. And I could lock them to the reference planes, but for now, I just want to show you how it looks when you create a mass in these more complicated models. Let's go to one of the elevation views. Let's try the front view. Okay, and sometimes when you go to the front view, by the way, you don't see anything. So sometimes when you're zoomed way out and you can't see the model, often you'll see like little funny dots. Revit allows you to choose a zooming option here. On the right side of your screen. Zoom all to fit is gonna hopefully, there we go. So what you'll see here, first of all, here's the cute little mass that I created. Oh, it's so cute. And I can stretch this up or down, right? It's just like a mass that we've created in other spaces. I can try anyway. So it works just you know, as we've seen other masses do. I can nudge it left or right, okay, based on its position. I can't nudge it up or down. I have to use the draggers because it is glued to this reference plane, the ceiling plane, right? This end of it, whoops, this end of it is glued there. If I detach it, it will lose that relationship, okay? Now, the other thing to notice, here's the light source, okay? If I click on it, it says light source. First of all, there are a lot of light source options here. If I just click light source definition after selecting the light source, you can actually choose a number of different ones. I'm going to stick with the kind of glowing bulb, and that's a good place to start. But you absolutely can have one that shines a spotlight that is a half moon kind of shape, or that is what's called a photometric web, where you can use the information from a manufacturer. You can also emit it from different shapes, so that light pattern can come out of basically a long glowing piece, a square piece, which obviously is like a trough, or a larger area. But basically the spotlight glowing is going to get you most of your light fixtures. And if you want to change its height, you actually really can just drag this down or up. And you can absolutely apply a parameter to this dimension, right? Remember how we did that, where we created a dimensional label that we can apply to a dimension. We can also create our own reference planes. So let's say I want to have this stem go down, oh, I don't know, about a foot from the ceiling. I can create a new reference plane. I just select this one reference plane and choose create similar. and I can draw it here above this one. Okay. And I can even name it if I wanted to. Sometimes that's helpful to keep track of things. Bottom of stem. Okay, whoops. And now, if I use the Align tool, I can align the bottom of the stem with this reference plane. Whoops, wrong way. I always get that order wrong. Align the reference plane to the bottom of the stem. And I can use this lock button, and that will force the stem to stay right there on that reference plane. Okay? Now I can go and I can create other geometry in this model to create my light fixture. So I'll actually fast forward through much of that. But needless to say, when you create geometry in this environment, having these reference planes is really helpful, because now I can create a shape off of this reference plane that will make it take advantage of its location. Now, the other thing that I can do, and I'll show you this in the ceiling plan view, is you can create an opening in the ceiling if you wanted to. So let's say I wanted to have a series of glowing bars that were around a recessed fixture. Okay, and I can copy this guy, and remember, because I have locked my alignment with the reference plane that I created, I could easily create multiple copies, and they will all retain that same kind of alignment. All right, there we go. We've got a nice bunch of glowing rods, maybe I'll create. And what I can do is I can create an opening in the middle of these and maybe put the light source up above the ceiling, okay? To do that is fairly straightforward. You just choose Create Opening, okay? And what this will do, it basically knows there's only one thing you can create an opening in this particular model. And I can come in here and I can even just use these as a reference and click the checkbox. And this is like an opening that we have made before. This is very common in light fixtures, okay, where you'll have an opening like this. And maybe we'll put the light fixture above this opening. So we'll go back to one of the elevation views. I can grab this light fixture and I can actually drag it up above the ceiling, okay? And some people will get super kind of anal, and they'll come and create like a little bit of geometry to make a housing for this fixture, and that's not a bad idea. Again, you'll want to create, if it's a box, just make sure it's open on the bottom so that the light can get out. Otherwise, Revit will give you a warning message saying that you've got solid geometry on top of your light fixture. Okay. You can also create a ring around this, some geometry that forms the opening. Okay, there are endless options for these light sources. One or two things you can do to make your life a little easier as you're editing these fixtures. One that I like is to use keyboard shortcuts. If you hold down the Alt key, you'll see a lot of the basic keyboard shortcuts pop up. So you hit the number 2 and Revit will save. You hit the number 4 and it's undo. And this is like AutoCAD and SketchUp. They're really great things to do. One that I know a lot of students like is WT, which I just tapped. That's window tile. And what that allows you to do, and this is super handy, when you're working, you can have a side view, a front view, an axonometric view, right? Each of these can be active at any time. And it's just really handy. Sometimes it makes it easier to select things. However, be aware that obviously if you have an itty bitty little screen like I have, this takes up valuable real estate. But I will absolutely be testing you on a couple of the most common keyboard shortcuts, and those are posted to Canvas. And in fact, my favorites are yellowed, so I'm making your life easy for you. So anyway, I have added a couple of parameters to this fixture, added some geometry for things like the housing above the roof, above the ceiling. Now we're going to talk about how to create family members little family planning here. If you go to the family types menu, what you'll see right now, I've created a bunch of parameters, which are type parameters. But now what I can do, if I create a new type, and those are all those parameters can be adjusted for any family I want. So let's say I'll have one with long stems on it, okay? And I can assign materials, although as I mentioned, I like to do that in the main model. But I can also change the bottom of the fixture to have a different dimension. Maybe this is going to be 2'6", and apply. And I could have one that has short stems. I'll make a new one, have it be short stems, okay. And in that one, maybe they're only 6 inches, okay. Apply. So now when I save this fixture, and again, I'll just hit save or hit the number 2, and I will load it into my project. So I've created a little spot for my fixture to go, a ceiling, okay, that will host my beautiful light. And with any luck, when we go to place this fixture, what we'll see is that the fixture is actually cutting a hole in the ceiling. There's a little kind of hole up there. And what you should also see is that these fixtures can be adjusted. I can select them, and they should have my family types in there. Okay, so again, it's not a perfect thing, model in place versus creating new in a family outside of the model. There's advantages and disadvantages, but you can see this is quite flexible. So one last thing that you can do before you head home is creating really cool shapes that are called conceptual masses. And I'm going to show you that. Just go to File, New, Family, and look under conceptual mass, and there should be a mass option in there. Okay. Now conceptual masses are a little different than regular masses in that they are, well, first of all, they're really big. The scale is set to 1/16 of an inch, and we're usually drawing stuff that's pretty small. It's meant actually as a way to draw entire buildings. The cool thing about the conceptual massing environment is it has all these reference planes, and they're super easy to fiddle around with. So for example, this is a reference plane. I can control, click, drag, and make a copy of it. Okay, so it's really easy to create reference planes. I could even make a bunch. I can just control, click, drag. I can set their dimension from each other, and I can also draw on any of them. All I have to do to draw on one is just double click on it. So I can click on this reference plane. Okay, maybe I'll flatten this out a little bit here so I can see it from above. And I could draw, I don't know, a circle on one. And then if I want to draw on the bottom, I can just double click on that, draw a shape on the bottom. And you might say, well, what if I want to draw on the middle? I can double click on the middle, draw a shape on that. So now what I have are 3 different shapes. And Revit, in its wisdom, allows me to select them. Again, they should be all in different planes, and I should be able to create either a solid or a void form. Okay, and Revit will kind of figure out what those forms are meant to be based on the shapes that you drew. So you see how it's connected these 3 pieces. You might say, well, how cool is that? Well, that's pretty cool. And what's really nice, if I just take a simple shape here and I turn it into a solid form, okay, Revit allows you to do really interesting manipulations of that shape. Let me get rid of this other one. It's kind of annoying me. This one, you can select any part of this mass and manipulate it. You can select the entire top, okay? And if you want to toggle between different elements, just hit Tab. Maybe I'll make this hidden line just so you can see a little more easily. That's the entire top. And you can do stuff like move it, like we did before, but you can also rotate it. In fact, you may not have been aware, but you can rotate these shapes even in our main mass builder, okay? You can also select just a line. So if I hit tab, now I end up with just a line, and I can do the same thing with this line. Okay, so this could be a great way to create some of those warpy kind of fixtures that we saw. Obviously, pretty tough for coffee cups on that one. Anyway, you can also select just a point. See if I move my mouse right over that edge. And again, tab will help you if you're not getting the point you want. This point will be something that you can grab and modify. Now I'll put shading back on so that you can get a little bit of a sense of what's going on. It's warping these surfaces, so you can really pretty quickly create some funky geometry. Okay, and these can be loaded into your model, and they're masses, right? So you can select them. And what I believe you can do is load them into a family. Again, it's a lot more complicated. Also, you'll notice the scale of these is much, much larger than you typically have. So you have to be aware of what scale you're working in. What I usually do is I actually have a template for a much smaller mass that I like to use. So the last thing you can do, and this conceptual massing environment is quite vigorous. One thing you can do, I'm going to work on this vertical plane, and I'm going to draw a 3D spline. And what that allows you to do, you can draw a couple of points. And a spline, again, this is like, you know, AutoCAD world here. It's a curve using Bezier points. These can be manipulated in 3 dimensions. These individual nodes or vertices, you can select them. You can try to select them. And you can warp it. And what happens is not only does it warp it in plan, it is warping it in 3 dimensions. And this can allow you to create some super funky things. First of all, to draw, you can draw on any of these vertices, and that will create basically a swept blend. All you have to do is click Set, click on one of these planes, and you see how it says, oh, that's a reference plane. I can deal with that. You just have to make sure that you're viewing that reference plane in a way which will allow you to draw on it. See how I was at a funny angle? Anyway, I'll just draw a simple shape on there. Line is slightly off. And my advice is if you do want to draw something like this is great for super interesting, complicated, blobitecture type of things. Make sure that you start simple and then build up as you go along. You see how it created this like funkadelic shape. You could do a round profile and get a piece of spaghetti. Or you can do a blend, a swept blend, and again, just set a work plane, then draw a shape. I'll draw a circle. And maybe I'll do one more. I'll do this shape here, and then I'll draw a hexagon. Let's see if this is going to work. And sometimes it doesn't work, okay? If you have too many forms, sometimes Revit just says, hold on, I can't do that. But here, you can see it creates a pretty unusual shape. Enough yet? Well, you can still come back in and make changes to this element. Sometimes it will cause the model to crash, but sometimes you can even take this thing further down the rabbit hole, if you know what I mean, to create some really interesting shapes. You know, something like this you could use to create a light fixture. We could add a glowing material to a surface of this, and it could make a really kind of snazzy element. Anyway, and that is it for creating families. You've got model and place families that you create in the model. You've got families that you create using the family editor, which is kind of separate from the main model. And then you have the conceptual mass editor for creating wacky stuff.